Okay, as some of you know, next Sunday we're going to have the annual memorial service. And Reverend Shanti came up with this a couple years ago as a way of honoring those who walked before us and allowed us to be here today. So we're going to celebrate the lives of Venerable Thich Venerable Karuna Dharma, and Venerable Havanpola Ratnasara. Now, each one of them made significant contributions to IBMC, and they were committed and to give Westerners, Americans, a place to study and learn. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of them from my perspective and let you know how I feel about it. And when I asked this morning how you're doing, somebody said grateful. And that's the exact word that I'm going to use. Julian said, I'm grateful that it's raining. And of course we all are, unless we have to drive in it. So what am I grateful for? Well, number one, I'm grateful that Thich Nhat came to America. Now, I never met him. He died before I ever saw him. I started coming here in 1979, and he died in 1980. And I don't know where he was on the evenings I came to study meditation or study the Dharma. But his legacy lives on, to say the least. And if it wasn't for him, this place wouldn't be here. And we wouldn't be here sitting in this place today. So he gave us an opportunity to practice and to be introduced to Buddhism. And it wasn't just Vietnamese Buddhism. That's why this center is called the International Buddhist Meditation Center. That he wanted Americans to have access to a variety of forms of Buddhism so they could make up their own mind on what kind of Buddhism spoke to them and what kind of Buddhism they wanted to practice. So it's with gratitude that I sit here today in his center that he started in 1970 and still exists today. Now, he was a very wise guy. He had great wisdom. And I think he understood that Americans probably wouldn't support this temple in the way that Asian Buddhists would support their temple. That's through donations and through dana. So what he did is he set up a residential program so people could live here if they wanted to. And right now we have around 20-25 residents that live here. And the significance of them living here is that they pay rent. And because they pay rent, we don't have to beg for money or ask for donations. We're always happy to accept them, of course, because maintenance on 100-year-old buildings is a continual project. But he understood that if Americans came here, they may not want to donate, but if Americans lived here, they'd be willing to pay rent. So we have enough money to do property taxes, mortgage, maintenance, all the necessary things of having a center. And in 2020 we will have been here for 50 years, which is really a long time in America for a Buddhist center to exist. So it's with gratitude that I think of Venerable Thich Nhat. The second person I'm grateful for is Shinzon Young. Now, some of you know him and some of you don't. But when I came here in 1979, Shinzon Young was the vice abbot. And I didn't know what a vice abbot was, but everybody seemed to be impressed by the title. And he would give Dharma talks. I think it was Monday nights. And I remember the first time I came here, it was raining, and it was cold, and I sat on the floor just like a lot of you are sitting on the floor, and it was a very uncomfortable experience. But what I remember the most is that he was Caucasian. Now, I thought to myself at the time, well, that's no big deal. But I hadn't seen many Caucasian monks. Most of them were Asian. And so when I saw this white guy with English as a first language speaking the Dharma, I'm going, hey, maybe I could do that too. I saw somebody that represented me and allowed me to feel comfortable in investigating the Buddha Dharma and what it meant to be a practicing Buddhist in America. He still continues to teach today, but he's no longer ordained. He's now a layperson. So with him, I think back and I think, how grateful I am that I had a guy that sort of looked like me speaking the Dharma to give me the thumbs up. It's okay to learn the Dharma. And it's here in America. I don't have to travel. The third person is Karuna Dharma. Now, Karuna Dharma was just a fascinating, multifaceted person. I met her initially before she had her stroke. And when I moved in here in 1993, she had already had her stroke. And so it allowed her to be even more unique than she already was. And I remember her speaking about certain things, and I'm going, wow, you know, I just don't get it. Because she came from a very unique perspective. She was a woman who was an abbess who ran the center. And there weren't that many around. She also had very fixed views of what it meant to be a feminist. And I came in being this sort of guy who didn't really think too much about what that meant, or thought I didn't need to know what that meant. And so she would enlighten me all the time about what it meant to her. She was very kind, but she also had tendencies to just sort of blow up like a firecracker. And she had this cane, and she would just wave that cane at you, you know, and sort of a finger pointing, but a big extension to the finger. And she would, and as soon as she blew up, she would just become calm again. It was very interesting to see her manifest in so many different ways so quickly and change so quickly. And I thought back, you know, what am I grateful for? Because I didn't understand why I needed to be grateful to her. Because I worked for her. She gave me a job. She said, after my novice ordination, we'd like you to work here. You can be the residential manager and find people to live here. And you can practice, and then you can go from novice monk to fully ordained monk, and this is a wonderful place to practice. I didn't realize that this was a wonderful place to practice. It just seemed like a place where I was practicing. It's hard to find the words that would describe someone who has changed your life. Because allowing me to work here and live here and practice here changed the direction of my life. And I don't know how many people in your life you can look at and say, you know, that one person made a significant difference in my life. And there's really no way to thank them for that. And oftentimes you're not aware of it, and they're not aware of it either. But as I look back, I see the tendency of me to be obsessed with certain things, overly enthusiastic with certain things, not being calm but excitable in certain ways. And yet she had this wonderful faculty to allow me to manifest in all the different ways I needed to manifest in order to grow. And growth can be difficult. I don't know if you find that to be the case, but I hated school because I had to grow each year to become a different and better person with more knowledge and more understanding. And it just became so difficult sometimes to want to leave your comfort zone and look at the world in a much different way. But when you live here, you're forced to look at the world in a much different way, because there's an inside and there's an outside. And if you only come here on Sundays or Wednesdays to meditate, you don't understand the dynamic of living in a meditation center and working in a meditation center, and feeling that in some ways you are distant from the world, and in other ways you are more part of the world than you want to be, because it keeps calling you to do this or to do that. So it's with gratefulness I look back at her, and she gave me a chance to be the person I could be. Until then, I was the person other people wanted me to be. But she was kind enough to give me enough room to grow and understand that I had a lot of potential that hadn't been realized yet. And then we come to Venerable Dr. Azara. Now, a lot of you may have met him or studied with him, and some of you don't know anything about him at all. But he was a Sri Lankan monk that came over in the late 70s, early 80s from Sri Lanka. And he was a remarkable man. At one point in his life, he represented Sri Lanka at the United Nations. He was their representative. So he loved politics, maybe more than he should have, but that seems to be the case with a lot of people. And he had this wisdom and this ability to, again, allow you to grow at your pace without forcing you to grow any faster than you're able to do. He started the Buddhist Sangha Council of Southern California. He was instrumental in starting the Buddhist Catholic Dialogue in Los Angeles. He also had the College of Buddhist Studies that he started, so those people like myself have a place to go and learn the Dharma in a more traditional way. And it was the first time I had a chance to hang out with an Asian monk, because like I said, we had Shinzon Young, and it was fun to hang out with him, but I understood how that worked. But with Dr. Azara, because he was an elder and he came from another country, it was interesting just to sort of be around him and see how he worked, see what he did, what he thought about. And one of my favorite times was when, after the college session was over and everybody had gone home and it was just me and him sitting in the office across the street, he'd say, "Kusala, go close the door." I'd say, "Okay." After I closed the door, he'd open up this little drawer and put his hand in and pull out a little cigar. And he didn't want anybody to see him smoke his cigar. So I had a chance to see him behind the scenes, and he enjoyed it so much, but he realized that people may not understand his enjoyment of a little cigar when he was a Buddhist monk who was supposed to be an ascetic and a renunciate and a simple lifestyle. But he really enjoyed that, and I thought that was so much fun to see him smoking his little cigar and be invited to participate in watching him at the College of Buddhist Studies. He also had a cat, Bobby Joe. And you know, a lot of monks don't necessarily like dogs or cats. They get in the way, you have to feed them. Sometimes they throw up, you got to clean that up, you know. But he had this cat, Bobby Joe, used to hang out on his desk and just watch him work. And every once in a while, he'd just put his hand over and pet the cat, and then he'd go back to work. So I had a chance to see that not only was he an elder and a Buddhist monk, but he was very much human as well. And that gave me the permission to, as I increased my understanding of Buddhism and my practice, that I didn't have to leave my humanness behind. That being a monk is being human first, a monk second. And oftentimes people will say, well, how could the monk say that or do that and da-da-da-da, because he's a monk? And what it turns out to be is he is always a human first and a monk second until he achieves nirvana. Then he is a monk first. But a lot of people take lifetimes to get there, myself included, so I'm going to be human the rest of this life for sure. So I was grateful to see an Asian monk in all his manifestations. I was grateful to see Reverend Karuna and giving me permission to stay here and work here and the ability to grow and enough room to grow in. And then Shinzon Young, the example of what it means to be a Caucasian monk in America and speaking English as your first language, though he did speak Japanese as well. But I'm proud that I only speak English, because it keeps my life a lot simpler. And then Venerable Thich, who was here and had the vision of starting centers in America. 2 or 3 centers for the Vietnamese and this center for the Americans. Now people ask me, well, what does an American look like? Well, American looks like every one of us. That's what an American looks like. So it's not for Caucasians or Asians or Hispanics. It's for humans who happen to be living in America, who happen to find Buddhism fascinating and maybe the path that will lead to freedom. And that's what this center is all about. So next week we're going to celebrate those three people and thank them and have gratitude towards them because they were insightful enough to see that America was a perfect place to start Buddhism. How cool is that? Now I'm going to go to a completely different direction because I was thinking about this the other day and it's fascinating to me. Why do people have to die? You know, and like a lot of people are dying all the time. Personalities, famous people, people you've never heard of, cats and dogs, fish, they're all dying all the time. And I thought to myself, well, why do they have to die? What is it in our life that determines why we have to die? And then I figured it out after a few minutes of reflection. It's because we're all born. And I know everybody's really excited about birth, you know, because it's a new opportunity to have a life and suffer and die again. How wonderful is that? And some people really like to encourage things to die, so they buy a boat and a fishing rod and they go fishing to kill fish. And it's one of the most joyous occasions of their week or their month to be out on the lake quietly reflecting on life, and then the bite, and then they reel it in, and then they just let it suffocate in the air. And you just go, man, what is wrong with humans, you know? Well, in the old days we had to eat and things that were living, and so I thought about that too. Isn't it just ironic that the only way we can exist is to kill things that are alive and take their life from them so we can continue ours? What a strange place this is, this earth. And that's why they call it samsara. This is the place where birth and death occur. And you can't have one without the other. So it's very dualistic, and it's generally all about birth and all about death and a little bit about the suffering in between, and that's where we come in. We get to think and talk and reflect on all the suffering between birth and death. And sometimes we even reach a point where we can end our suffering before we die. So we don't have to die and suffer, because most people are not afraid of death, but they're afraid of suffering until they die. And then we get to be reborn again and again. And the thought came, well, what's being reborn? You know? And if we were all Hindu sitting in an ashram right now, we could all say, well, of course it's the soul. You know, that's what's being reborn. We all know that. But we're sitting in a Buddhist meditation center, and we really can't say that because it doesn't apply to us as Buddhists. So what's being reborn is our karma. Wow! How important is that? Because if it wasn't for karma, we wouldn't be reborn, we wouldn't have birth in the first place, or death in the second place. And can karma determine how little or much we suffer in the world between our birth and our death? And yes, absolutely. And do we have any control over our karma? Yes, absolutely. Are we in charge of our suffering? Yes, we are. So our job, I think, at some level, is to understand how karma works so we can work with it. And we can use it to our advantage and not our disadvantage. So karma is made up of three components. It's what you think, it's what you say, and it's what you do. And what you think, say, and do determines what's happening right now and what's going to happen tomorrow and the next year and the next lifetime. So we need to sit a lot. We need to be quiet. We need to reflect. We need to see how our mind works. And we need to understand that at some point we have a choice to make. Do we let our intentions manifest in speech and action, or do we not let them manifest in speech and action? And if they're going to manifest in a skillful, positive way, then yes, we should encourage our own speech and action to manifest in the world, because other people will benefit as well as us. And if we have nothing good to say, well, maybe we need to reflect on not saying it. Now, just the other day, I was in a sandwich shop, and I was getting a submarine sandwich. And it's one of the best places that sells them. And I was talking to the owner a little bit about the Super Bowl. You know, hey, did you see the Super Bowl? Wasn't that a terrible game? Which, you know, I probably should have just said, did you see the Super Bowl, and not added my own commentary. And then he said, you know what's really exciting is, like 2020, we're going to have the Super Bowl here. Right here in Los Angeles, at the new stadium. That's exciting. And I said, yeah, I don't know anybody that can afford to go to the Super Bowl. The tickets are too much money. And other than that, it's a whole new layer of traffic we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have thousands of people coming here, driving around, not knowing where they're going, getting in our way, those of us that live here. And he just looked at me and walked away without saying a word. I just ruined his whole fantasy of the Super Bowl in LA. And on reflection, I thought to myself, maybe I didn't need to say that. I thought it, I felt it, but it really didn't serve any good purpose to share with people. And the older I get, the more I realize I'm seeing the world in a slightly different way than most people see it. And a lot has to do with just being old and being around for such a long time and seeing all the possibilities and outcomes of situations and realizing most of them are not good outcomes or even positive outcomes, but really unskillful outcomes that cause so much more suffering rather than less suffering. And if only they would listen to me, I could tell them how to change the way they did things, and we would all suffer less. And then I go for a cup of coffee and take a nap. Because it'll never happen. The world will never be a good place to live. Because birth and death occur, and in between we have suffering. And we're going to have a lot of opinions. So as our life gets shorter, our anecdotes get longer. And we're just sharing stories and visions of utopia, and nobody wants to hear it. They got a game to go to, or a concert to see, or a book to read, or TV to watch, and you know. So I'm finding that as we get older, speaking for myself, as I get older, maybe solitude and silence is really a good direction to go in. So you don't upset the apple cart and make everybody feel uncomfortable with this wonderful life they're trying to live and failing miserably at it. That it's just how you do it. None of us are going to do it very well, and then we're all going to die. And some will have regrets and some won't. So the secret, I suppose, of a good life is at the end of it, not to have any regrets. That you really lived as fully and engaged as you possibly could. Didn't necessarily bring a lot of happiness or joy or success, but you were there and you were awake and you were doing it. And along the way, sometimes you find things to assist you, to support you in your journey, in your life. And that's why I think that this little meditation center was one of those things in my life that allowed me to see the world in a much different way, do something that benefited others as well as myself, have gratitude, and not have those just negative thoughts at the end of my life of what could I have done? What could I have done better? That I did everything I thought I could do, and even more, because my potential was being realized in so many unique ways. And Bob Dylan said this. He said, you wake up in the morning and you go to bed at night. And in between, if you did what you wanted to do, that is success. And that's how I look at my life. I wake up in the morning, I go to sleep at night, and in between, I'm doing the stuff that I think benefits me and others. And one of the milestones that I will share with you right now is I joined Facebook 10 years and 3 months ago. And just a week or so ago, I found out that I have 1 million likes. Go figure. 1 million likes. So in some small way, I've made people happy 1 million times. And maybe made them unhappy 1,000 times. How cool is that? And then just a couple days ago, I now am on Alexa. You can say, Urban Dharma podcast skill, and you can hear my podcasts on Alexa. How wonderful is this world we live in? So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for coming to hear me talk today, visiting the center. And maybe in the future you'll look at this center and you'll see that it was a life draft, a lifesaver, a place that encouraged you to be the best person you could be. Thank you.